Hello everyone, and welcome to the Yissilmissil Productions channel. My name is Steven Yissel, and today we are continuing our deep dive series into the Bermuda Triangle. Now, we should be live right now on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute, and Odyssey. So, welcome to all the new live viewers, and this is the literature we are going to get into today. And this is by author Gian J. Quasar. We've been going through this for quite a bit now, and I do have a few bookmarks in here, but this is where we're at currently. So we're almost halfway through. And hey, Zenray, good to see you here in the chat. Appreciate you being here. So, today's topic is space-time vortices, 0 point, and sunken worlds. So we have some pretty cool stuff to dig into here today. But before we start, as always, I will get our slideshow going of the Illuminati. Which again, if you're new here, this is the submersible that was used to basically crawl the bottom of the Atlantic and to found some roads down there. So we're going to begin now, and make sure to like the stream, share it around to your friends and family if they share similar interest in this topic. And also subscribe if you want to see more of this. Everything helps out with the analytics, so I appreciate your time here. Oh, and one more thing. We'll get that music going. So we are starting Chapter 6, Space-Time Vortices, 0 point, and Sunken Worlds. Now we'll get through probably half of this chapter, because it's really jam-packed. But I'm going to give us a 2-hour cutoff limit, so I'm going to begin now. Oh, Zenray, thank you. Zenray with the super chat. $4.99. You guys are what makes this possible. And Zenray's been a very active member of the channel here, so I really appreciate that. This ain't your typical deep dive. This will continue to go on and on. If you guys need to catch up at all, I have the playlists of every previous part of this series that you could look into. And again, we are live on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute, and Odyssey today. So we got 4 streams going. And BitChute's all caught up. All the uploads from YouTube are now on BitChute, and Rumble's in the process of getting caught up, as well as Odyssey. But I have all those platforms there in case people have a preference. But either way, this is to try to get to as many people as possible, given the algorithm circumstances. And that's about it. So we'll get going here because we are a bit on a time limit. Chapter 6. Those who say that the Bermuda Triangle is not unique are, in one sense, correct in that disappearances do happen in other parts of the world. This, however, does not imply an even spread to these disappearances over the Earth's oceans. Ships and planes travel all over the seas, with accidents happening anywhere. Disappearances, on the other hand, seem to happen more frequently in groupings such as the Great Lakes of the United States and Canada, and the seas off Japan between the Mariana Islands and the East China Sea. This last area is the only other place to achieve special recognition like the Bermuda Triangle, inasmuch as Japanese seamen have long dubbed it the Devil's Sea because of its history of unexplained disappearances and unusual events. Also, in the 1950s, the Japanese government declared the area dangerous because of its unpredictable volcanic activity. This activity may explain some of the electromagnetic disturbances of compasses, LORAN, and other electronic equipment also reported here, as well as some disappearances from huge and sudden displaced seas swamping a vessel before it can get off an SOS. But the so-called Devil's Sea also shares another interesting coincidence with the Bermuda Triangle. It is located on the exact opposite side of the Earth and between the same latitudes of 20 to 30 degrees north. But while this similarity is of apparent interest, it is not half as piquing as its dissimilarities. These include the lack of treacherous currents over the shallow banks of the Bahamas and the lack of strong Gulf Stream currents, factors for which disappearances are so mundanely blamed in the Triangle are completely absent off Japan. Nevertheless, disappearances are not only frequent in the Devil's Sea, but some have been singularly spectacular. The most recent cases have included the Japanese fishing vessel Daryu Maru No. 3, which disappeared with 15 crew on February 14, 1992. The large freighter Vast Ocean last reported itself off the Japanese island of Kyushu almost exactly 1 year later, on February 15, 1993, and was never heard from thereafter. On November 21, 1995, the Alkasham last reported herself approaching this area en route for Anahama, Japan, and disappeared without trace. The Yuko Maru No. 8, carrying 25 tons of fish, was found derelict off Japan on January 7, 1992, smoldering between her deckhouse and stern. No trace of any of her crew was found, nor exactly how they left the ship. Most recently, the 23,000-ton Honghai Sanyo, that's spelled Hongae SANYO, 2 words, with 28 crew on April 11th, 2001, sent off a mayday similar in some respects to those in the Bermuda Triangle, saying that a strong wind had suddenly hit it. It was southeast of Japan at the time. No further messages were received. When a search was mounted, only her empty lifeboats were found. Later, one body was located, and patches of oil were sighted rising up from beneath the sea. There is nothing readily available to blame, since tumultuous seas are absent. Piracy is often rampant in the Orient, though usually closer to China, in the South China Sea, in the Straits of Malacca, and off the Malay Peninsula. In general, no particular kind of vessel seems prone to disappear. The dominant type of traffic through an area seems to be the victim, no matter what it is, whether huge merchant ships or daily charters, a fact underlined by the other area of mystery, the Great Lakes, where there are certainly no strong currents, or pirates, or volcanoes. From 1964 to the present, which this book was written in 2004, about 30 private and charter aircraft have disappeared while navigating over the Great Lakes. Accident records for the bordering states of Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Ohio do not reveal statistical similarities for sudden loss, that is, involving planes that plummeted to the ground before a mayday could be sent. The scenario, one must assume, happened over the Great Lakes, the only difference being that the waters cover any remains. Most of the accidents in these states happened during landing or takeoff, often in the winter when drifting snowbanks and flurries can confuse a pilot. Since landing and takeoff maneuvers are not done over the lakes, the disappearances in flight over the water stand out as even more disproportionate. Considering the many dissimilarities between these areas, several independent researchers have used a process of elimination to uncover any underlying thread, a process that has led them all to one common denominator: strong geomagnetic lines. This coincidence raises the question about the potential of this force field. Magnetic field readouts are the oldest scrutinized geophysical data available. Their strength, vagaries, and anomalies have been studied for the past century and a half. Nevertheless, repeat readings and tests continue to offer puzzling and conflicting results, leaving us with an unstable foundation for even interpreting its potential. Our inability to even crack the shell of its origin still elicits qualified opinions similar to those expressed by Dr. J. Manson Valentine. Quote, "To begin with, it happens to be the only inanimate phenomenon for which we have been unable to conceive a mechanistic analog. We can visualize electronics traveling along a conductor and thus explain electric current, or we can envisage energy waves of different frequencies in the ether and thus explain the heat-light ratio spectrum. but a magnetic field defies a mechanical interpretation. There's something almost mystical about it." End quote. The association of this still mysterious force field with an even more mysterious force, time itself, opens the door on some intriguing theories on time warps. The possibility of space-time warps is gaining greater recognition in scientific nomenclature, not only as a model, but as theoretical science. Time's association with magnetism and gravity is vital to Einstein's theory of relativity, which regards gravity not as a force, but as a curvature of space near a massive object. Einstein predicted that even light, itself an electromagnetic wavelength, which traditionally follows straight lines, would bend while traveling through curved space. This was empirically observed when Sir Arthur Eddington detected a change in a star's position during a total eclipse in 1919. General relativity went on to predict that gravity also distorts time. This was later confirmed by extremely accurate atomic clocks ticking a few microseconds per year faster at high altitudes where the Earth's gravity is weaker. However, in our experience thus far, these vagaries seem only minute, as the temperature changes on a spring day or in the slightly shifting breeze in the dead of summer. An atomic clock records time passing faster in less gravity. An object falls faster at the poles than at the equator, but nature is subject to violent shifts. A summer breeze to a strong foehn, that's spelled Foehn, a bright spring day to a sudden thunderstorm, a calm morning obliterated by a tornado into which everything in the surrounding atmosphere is drawn into its vortex. Are magnetism and gravity subject to the same tumults? The changing of the subtle variations into sudden and terrifying aberrations. Places characterized both by concentrations of disappearances and by the persistence of unexplained electromagnetic field anomalies raise the possibility that these areas may contain transient magnetic vortices capable of warping gravity locally and in turn even space or time itself. Ships and planes traveling through or near one of these vortices at the right moment, or wrong moment, according to your point of view, might simply disappear by being held in time. An appreciation of this possibility can be had from the generally accepted geophysical theory that magnetic vortices do swirl into and out of existence within the body of the Earth, caused by factors of rotation and possible shifts of the mantle disturbing the generation of the field. Considering that this same incline is key to the wide array of weather fluctuations on the surface, may help us envision how certain areas of the Earth, like the Triangle, may likewise be prone to magnetic vortices extending to its surface, while others are not, just as these same factors contribute to tornadoes and cyclones, very visible atmospheric vortices, to swirling into existence only along the same latitudes with great ferocity, but in others are non-existent or freak events. The greatest mysteries, like time, however, are not found in the minutiae of scientific hair-splitting, but are often found in those things we take for granted. Things so omnipresent, they are rendered invisible. For instance, we often erroneously think that we live in 3 dimensions of space, and therefore we are confused about where to place the domain of time. In fact, we occupy 3 dimensions of space, but we live in the 4th dimension of time. We do not often consider that we are traveling in time, and that there may be varying rates of progression of time depending on the strength of the curvature of space. By its mass and velocity through space, the Earth is curving space around it and thereby slowing time fractionally within its gravitational field, as opposed to its orbital heights. It stands to reason that the same effect can be created or intensified by the action of a vortex, itself a smaller version of the great rotating orb of the Earth, and therefore capable of infinitely faster speeds, and with this a greater potential to bend space and then slow time within its clutches. This is predicated on the belief that the spinning nature of a vortex is the most essential for creating a torsion field around it. If strong enough, the torsion field becomes, in a highly anodyne sense, a vacuum that could be capable of bending space and thereby redirecting all the frequencies in a local place, drawing them into a different curvature of space than they would normally take. Since we see along electromagnetic wavelengths, the vortex would be invisible, and any aircraft or ship coming in within its field would presumably suddenly vanish, just as in the case of a mirage, itself the result of fractionally bending space. We must remember that everything is in vortex kinesis. The effect of energy is to cause rotation. From the largest galaxies to the tiniest building blocks of matter, the nuclei of atoms rotate on their axis, and the electrons revolve at tremendous speeds around them. To create a dangerous vortex is merely to intensify the natural action of energy. It is now understood that an atom, of which all matter is composed, is essentially electric in nature. However esoteric this may sound, the atomic age has given us a very real understanding of the possibilities of a magnetic vortex. There are a little over 100 atoms in the universe that we know of, which make up the structure of all matter. The building blocks of the atom are the charged particles, protons, and electrons. Any atom consists of a nucleus that holds an equal number of protons, as there are electrons in orbit around it. The simplest, hydrogen, is a nucleus with 1 proton inside and 1 electron in orbit. The next is helium with 2 protons in the nucleus and 2 electrons in orbit. An atom with 3 protons in the nucleus and 3 electrons in orbit is not a gas anymore. It is the silver-white metal lithium. An atom that has 8, although heavier atoms, is once again a gas, oxygen. Lead, a heavy metal, has 82 But radon, which is heavier, is nevertheless a gas again. It has 86. The point is clear. They are all protons. They are all electrons. One atom is no different than the other, except in number. Therefore, the structure of all matter must be the energy the varying numbers generate, and the fields the different numbers create. And by their positions, interlock, bend, divert, or whatever, not in the basic makeup of the particles. When the director of the Moody Institute of Science, Dr. Irwin A. Moon, once observed that the appearance of the atom is that of a mini solar system, most of it space. All this space is the electromagnetic energy between these charged particles that bind substance together. He added, quote, "Take away the space from matter and all you have left are particles so tiny as to be invisible even under the most high-powered microscope." End quote. Phenomenal examples exist within our own scientific reference of deadly and destructive energy being made to pass through mass, a denser form of energy, without affecting it adversely by simply changing its frequency. In other words, pass an electric current, electron particles, through a body made up of molecules, a combination of atoms. For instance, it is a fact that 1 million volts of high-frequency electricity at 60 cycles alternating current will be instantly fatal to a human being. But 1 million volts at 65,000 cycles can be channeled through the body and just discharged out the fingertips like lightning if metal thimbles are provided as a point of discharge. In essence, an individual may, at the right frequency, channel through the body trillions of the same particles that together compose the most impregnable bulwarks. Noting this, Dr. Moon directs our attention to the fact that it is not the particles and atoms that prevent us from walking through a wall, but the mutually interactive frequencies of forces between the wall's particles and ours. If an entirely undetectable spectrum of electromagnetic frequencies exists, then, quote, "It is within the realm of scientific possibility that there could be two worlds, coexistent, occupying the same part of space at the same moment of time. Each world just as real as the other, with its mountains, valleys, rivers, trees, and people. That each world could pass freely through the other world without being conscious of the existence of the other world, if you grant just one thing: atomic forces within the material substances of these two worlds which are not mutually interactive." End quote. So we have diagrams here I'll show briefly, but it says underneath it, reality, the atomic structures of 5 common elements: hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and iron. All atoms are made of protons, electrons, and neutrons, except hydrogen, which has no neutron. Protons and neutrons, or nucleons, rotate within the nucleus while electrons orbit the nucleus at tremendous speeds. No matter what anything looks like, everything in the universe is made up of a combination of these 3 charged particles. In relation to the galaxy and the universe, our solar system can be viewed as one atom with the greater molecule of all creation. What greater electromagnetic energy exists throughout all space and matter for an infinite potential of effects for communication, travel, time, and being? Manipulation of electromagnetic energy is limitless power. So we just have some examples of the basics here. Different elements. Let's check the chat here. Hey Lerny, good to see you. Zenray, what's antediluvian? That's interesting. Roger from Mud Fossil University. Yeah, I know. He's following. He's doing something really different with that. Yeah, Mud Fossil University is cool to check out, but I think that strays a little away from what we're covering here tonight. But if you haven't caught any of his work yet, I suggest just checking it out, seeing what your thoughts are on it. Give me 1 second here. I'm just making sure we're all good on the other platforms. It seems like we are. The different numbers. Yep. All's looking good. Alright, we already got 2 more subs on Rumble just from this stream. So thank you guys. I appreciate that. Alright, we already got 2 more subs on... Give me a second here. Yeah, everything's good. We're live on all platforms. So we're on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute, and Odyssey tonight. It's my first time doing all 4. I really like that we got that working. So we doubled the amount of streams from Sunday. We've quadrupled since before then, because we were originally only streaming on YouTube. So we doubled the amount of streams from Sunday. We've quadrupled. Sorry for the repetition if you heard that. I got some of these other windows open. Alright, we're going to continue on. Just good to see that. It's good to see everything's healthy. The idea of a space warp and coexistent worlds, as envisioned above, might be easier to imagine if using a spectrum or hologram card as an anomaly, or as analogy. Returning the electromagnetic frequencies may be like turning the spectrum or adjusting the card and seeing a different image. No mass or space has changed, but light now brings to our eyes a whole different realm. Providing what is perhaps a logical extreme, Dr. Valentine further offers, quote, "It is therefore reasonable to suppose that a genesis of unusual magnetic conditions could affect a change of phase in matter, both physical and vital. If so, it would also distort the time element, which is by no means an independent entity. Like a tornado, the magnetic vortex would be self-augmenting and could well bring about an interdimensional transition for anyone caught up in it." End quote. Recent breakthroughs testify to the remarkable power even a weak magnetic vortex has on the mystery of gravity, and therefore possibly on different curvatures of space and electromagnetism. A 12-inch diameter device invented by Russian scientist Dr. I'm gonna butcher this name up. Dr. Evgeny Podkletnov. And that's spelled Evgeny Podkletnov. In 1996, at Tampere University Laboratories in Finland, appears to have unexpectedly nullified gravity. The circular device was a donut-shaped ceramic superconductor ring placed over solenoids to levitate it magnetically and start it spinning. The ring was encased in an outer steel casing which contained liquid nitrogen to cool the ring as it spun. Although the purpose of the test was not anti-gravity, this effect, or more correctly, gravity shielding, as Dr. Podkletnov prefers to put it, was noticed when an assistant's pipe smoke drifted over the operating device and straightaway rose to the ceiling, where it hovered. When the ring was made to spin at 5,000 RPM, objects suspended over the device lost a percentage of their weight. When Dr. Podkletnov tested the area directly above the device, even to the top floor of the building, he discovered a circular funnel 12 inches in diameter of less gravity that went through all floors and perhaps then extended upwards into space. So the real extent of this, I guess, is undetermined still. Just keep going, though. Wilbert B. Smith, a Canadian physicist, discovered something that could be considered a natural counterpart to Dr. Podkletnov's gravity shielding funnel. My apologies. Gravity shielding funnel. His global surveys with Project Magnet in the 1950s discovered similar funnels measuring about 1,000 feet in diameter, extending from the ocean surface to very high altitudes, wherein the magnetic and gravitational readings gave indication of less attraction to the Earth. He referred to these mysterious funnels as areas of, quote, reduced binding, end quote, and noted that they were far more common and pronounced in southerly latitudes like the Triangle. Like an invisible tornado, these areas moved or disappeared. Quote, when we looked for some of them a few months later, we could find no trace, end quote. Commenting on the degrees of intensity of these holes in the sky, Smith reported, quote, some planes, of course, would not be affected by the conditions. Others might fly to pieces in a storm of turbulence, end quote. The varying intensity of these areas might suggest they are indeed magnetic vortices. The intensifying factor could be from subsolar storms, in which the Earth and the Triangle in particular are being bombarded by charged particles. These particles would be attracted to the magnetism of the vortex and then turn it into a vortex of charged particles, perhaps even until it becomes a visible atmospheric phenomenon like an electronic spiraling cloud. Detection of spiraling clouds on September 26, 2001, after a subsolar storm, was enough to cause NASA to postpone a launch. Photographs taken of the clouds captured a telltale clue. They had long whorls, corkscrew tails, created by the charged particles spiraling around the lines of force of the magnetic field. This bears a remarkable resemblance to Bruce Gernon's description of the sudden formation of a lenticular cloud, and then the formation of a vortex within this cloud, through which he exited. I believe we read about that account last week. It is possible that this cloud contained charged particles. As a matter of interest, he was flying in the direction of the magnetic field's line of force, and this tunnel opened up along this same path. This tunnel sounds more or less like a natural horizontal counterpart to Dr. Podkletnov's magnetic vortex. Gernon even reported a sensation of zero gravity. Perhaps this could have prevented him from detecting any G-forces caused by a hyperacceleration this magnetic tunnel would have given a speeding airplane, much like the smoke that zoomed to the ceiling in Podkletnov's lab. If so, this also would explain how he could have covered so much distance in less time, and without expending the required fuel. However, this meteorological formation did not extend near where Gernon emerged from his electronic fog. This once again raises the confusing conjectures about magnetic vortices and curvature of space and time. Perhaps more than anyone else, Ivan Sanderson associated swirling ocean currents and their patterns with a catalyst for possible, quote, vile vortices, end quote, in the world. Studying disappearances around the world revealed they recurred in roughly lozenge-shaped areas, tilted to the right, the most volatile to the east of continents. Plotting these areas on a globe revealed a curious discovery. The areas were at precisely 72-degree intervals, latitudinally. The total number of areas was also interesting. There were no fewer than 12 areas of vortices, 5 in the northern hemisphere and 5 in the southern, with the Bermuda Triangle and the Devil's Sea coinciding mathematically as two of the vortices, and with one each at the poles. And we have a diagram here. It says Sanderson's concept of areas prone to natural vortices based on the strong swirling currents and the sharp contrasting temperatures. He attributes the prevalence of anomalies in the triangle to the fact that it is more heavily traveled. And we actually looked at this on the leyline map. You go to leylines.net, I believe. But you have to input all the different grid lines. And I'm not sure I'll be able to recreate it the way I did in the past. It would take a lot longer for me to accomplish what we showed on screen because I have to do it all individually now. So we're just not seeing the top and the bottom portions, but that's where the 12 major points of intersection would be. Each area shared strong swirling currents colliding tangentially and all precisely in curious areas where hot surface currents stream out of the tropical latitudes toward the colder waters of the temperate. These are areas of extreme temperature variabilities that alone would predicate a very high incidence of violent marine and aerial disturbances. But more likely, areas for storms and wrecks and founderings and even magnetic anomalies. He offers an intriguing supposition that the plane or vessel might be the catalyst for these anomalies if they, quote, just happened to lock into a phase with some natural frequency over the area in which they were flying, say a vortex caused by a cold whirlpool of lower air over a hot sea surface, to produce something quite else, which happened to be the trigger which set off other natural procedures in that area. Quote, end quote. Since, quote, every tiny bit of our universe, end quote, this planet, quote, we and all other life forms are essentially electrical devices, end quote. He rhetorically asks, quote, what could not happen, end quote. Hey Jason H, good to see you here. An answer may come from a surprising source. Unusual and hitherto impossible phenomena have been generated by lay scientist John Hutchinson in his Hutchinson effect, with startling ramifications. A consideration of his discoveries, authenticated by videotape, film, and personally observed by several accredited scientists, aspects of which were then independently duplicated, is in order. And I highly recommend those of you interested to check out John Hutchinson, that's spelled Hutchison. And I remember there used to be videos on YouTube, some which I was able to acquire for my own personal collection, but I do believe this was covered on Art Bell's radio program, though I'm not 100% on that, but I think it falls in line with that. He was basically making metal turn into putty. Like, he was literally able to bend spoons and make things levitate. Continuing on here. Hutchison might be described as a proverbial boy tinkerer. Since childhood, he has experimented with electromagnetism and electrical induction. He stumbled onto his effect in 1979 when he was attempting to study the longitudinal wavelengths of Nikola Tesla, an electrical and radio waves pioneer. Limited by space in his Vancouver home, he crammed into one room a variety of devices that emit electromagnetic fields, such as Tesla coils, Van de Graaff generators, radio frequency transmitters, signal generators, and others. When he turned them on, over a period of time, things began to happen. While he was working on his equipment, something hit him in the shoulder. An object he wasn't expecting because it was actually levitating. With further experimentation, he has produced a number of astonishing effects. Videotape captured a 19-pound bronze cylinder rising grandly into the air. This fact was not only surprising, to say the least, but the distance it rose was extraordinary. Some 80 feet from the center of the device. That is, all the various equipment he had assembled. More inexplicable still, this marvel was achieved, as its creator admits, with only, quote, 110 volts alternating current, end quote. Wood, plastic, copper, zinc, styrofoam, rubber, and even a 60-pound cannonball have all levitated. Objects have suddenly appeared and disappeared. And water, or any liquid, in buckets, containers, or even drinking glasses, has spontaneously swirled, or mild vortex kinesis. And corona manifestations, or exotic lights, have filled the lab. The anti-gravity effects are not limited to mere hovering, as noted by electromagnetic researcher Albert Budden, and that's spelled Budden. So here's what Albert has to say. The Hutchison device produces effects which can basically be divided into two categories: propulsive and energetic. It can induce lift in objects made of any material and also propel them laterally. It has been noted that there are 4 types of trajectory that affect objects weighing a few pounds, and all of these upward movements begin with a twisting spiral movement. Also, there has to be a particular geometry in relation to the direction of gravity, i.e., downwards of these objects, for them to be affected in this way. Some objects will not take off if you turn them on their sides, but will if you stand them on their heads. It is evident, therefore, that the relationship of their physical forms to the fields which swirl invisibly around them is important. Hutchison's work has been subject to broad, though varying degrees of interest and approval over the last 22 years. 3 nations have aired his work. He was courted by scientists in Japan. He was accused of treason in Canada when he went to Germany for funds to continue. His laboratory was ransacked by Canadian officials who seized his equipment under the pretense of confiscating his antique gun collection, which was, however, later returned with no explanations or charges. Los Alamos National Laboratory has done research on the Hutchison effect. In 1990, once again the Canadian government seized his crated lab equipment while in transit to Germany and never returned despite a court order when he was seeking financial aid to continue his studies. The military of Canada and the United States have expressed a covert interest. He regularly receives Christmas cards from the White House. He has been arrested by the Canadian government and handcuffed on his doorstep while his lab was ransacked and investigated again, under the excuse of checking his antique gun collection again. This last incident was March 17th, 2000, and may have been investigated by a neighbor who complained to the police after he thought he might have experienced an unexpected levitation. Because of all this, which has been ongoing for more than 33 years, Hutchison's lab has undergone numerous changes, from completely disappearing into government hands to vital pieces having been sold off later because of financial problems. Nevertheless, Hutchison has continued his work. He has tinkered with and adjusted his equipment and continues to get varying and remarkable results, many of which have been documented and photographed by McDonnell Douglas Aerospace and the Max Planck Institute in Germany. Some of these results give us an alarming view of the potentiality of electromagnetic effects on matter, its destruction, its transmutation. Metal turns white hot, but does not burn surrounding flammable material. 1-inch metal bars split, shred at the fracture point, wriggle like a worm, and flutter like a rag in the wind. Fires start around the building out of non-flammable materials like cement and rock. Metal warps and bends and even breaks, separating by sliding in a sideways fashion. And some instances, it crumbles like cookies. Perhaps no other scientist has gone as far in reproducing the Hutchison effect as noted electrical engineer Dr. George Hathaway. His observations of his and Hutchison's joint duplications are worthy of note. Hathaway reported, among other startling effects, that an aluminum rod was distorted out of shape and another, quote, was blown into little fibers, end quote. Molybdenum's melting point is 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's spelled MOLYBDENUM. But after subjecting molybdenum rods to Hutchison's electromagnetic fields, quote, we watched these things wiggle back and forth, end quote. He concludes, quote, in general, the collection of pieces of metal shows that they have been blasted apart or twisted. I'm going to pause here for a moment. The Hutchison effect is very fascinating. I've looked into it in the past, and it seems like one of the more legit situations. There's a lot of video evidence, and the fact that he's had stuff disappear with documented results, like his neighbor. It's just fascinating. Alright, continuing on. Another effect is equally astounding. In describing this, one observer, Mark A. Solis, that's spelled S-O-L-I-S, notes that, quote, dissimilar substances can simply come together, yet the individual substances do not disassociate. A block of wood can simply sink into a metal bar, yet neither the block of wood nor metal bar come apart. End quote. He adds, quote, there is no evidence of displacement, such as would occur if, for example, one were to sink a stone in a bowl of water. End quote. I'm just trying to visualize this. So he's saying that the two different substances, like wood sinking into metal, it wouldn't displace any of it, so it just combines, I guess is what he's saying. But perhaps one of the most remarkable aspects of the Hutchison effect is spontaneous invisibility of metallic materials in the active zone of his Pharos-type Hutchison apparatus. Hutchison speculates that if his equipment were properly adjusted, the chronons and gravitons generated by his technology could cause entire buildings to disappear. Observers of Hutchison's experiments and demonstrations, which he has given over 750, have uniformly expressed astonishment at the weak electrical power that seems to be sufficient to produce very stupefying results. Since basic outlets in any house supply enough power to operate his many machines, the power that unleashes all these astonishing effects is believed to lie elsewhere, such as where the various electromagnetic fields invisibly interplay. But how these independent fields interact is still largely a mystery. Even where they interact can be perplexing. Sometimes one must wait for days for something to happen. and 99% of the time, nothing happens at all. To draw an analogy, it is like trying to boil water without being able to determine the strength of the heat. In such a scenario, it is not surprising that it might take different amounts of time to produce the boiling effect. Since the effects of the materials vary greatly, it seems logical to assume that there is some form of disruption of the basic atomic structure, considering that fusion of non-identical materials, fires, levitating objects, invisibility, etc., have nothing in common but the energy from these building blocks of matter. Hutchison has long considered this plethora of effects. He suggests that somehow the surface skins of the masses undergoing this effect may become excited, quote, and their atoms create an unstable space-time situation, end quote. He further theorizes, quote, this might allow the fields from the Tesla coils and RF generation equipment to lock up in a local space-time situation. My thought is that now a small amount of energy is released from the vast reservoir in space-time at the subatomic level to create a disruptive or movement effect, end quote. A possible source for all this power is suggested by Mark Solis, or Solis. His last name spelled S-O-L-I-S. Quote, it is surmised by some researchers that what Hutchison has done is tap into the zero-point energy. This energy gets its name from the fact that it is evidenced by oscillations at 0 degrees Kelvin, where supposedly all activity in an atom ceases. The energy is associated with the spontaneous emission and annihilation of electrons and positrons coming from what is called the quantum vacuum. The density contained in the quantum vacuum is estimated by some at 1,013 joules per cubic centimeter, which is reportedly sufficient to boil off the Earth's oceans in a matter of moments. One can only pause at this moment to consider what unlimited power the Earth may have to randomly unleash micro moments of such energy if its electromagnetic wavelengths and frequencies are sufficiently disrupted, and equally to be alarmed at what the results might be to a ship or plane in the vicinity. Hutchison is keenly aware of similarities in the Hutchison effect to many of the reports in the Bermuda Triangle. In commenting on the applied ramifications, he has speculated, quote, it is highly probable that nature can form these fields on her own and create the right situation for the ship or aircraft to either totally disintegrate or disappear into another dimension or domain, end quote. But his observation of another effect produced in his lab provides perhaps the most concrete link between electromagnetism and the triangle. Quote, I have personally experienced the grayish type mist when I was doing my high voltage research, and this mist would appear and disappear. To look at it, it looks like metallic. I couldn't see through it, so it exists. End quote. Somehow it is easy to recall what Frank Flynn described from the Coast Guard cutter Yamacraw, and also the many fogs and vapors reported by pilots that seem to possess electronic properties. One might also recall Gurnon's impression that the electronic fog seemed to travel with his plane and that the plane was not traveling through it. A prescient correlation to a, quote, cling of gray fog, end quote, that Hutchison has observed and even filmed on 8mm, materializing around objects during some tests. Recalling the unusual spiraling clouds and vapors in the triangle, and the effects such spinning matrices have on gravity, one leads to further speculation on the ships and planes missing in the Bermuda Triangle. Caught in such invisible magnetic vortices, could an object disappear up instead of down, with bits and pieces ultimately raining down far away? For, despite official denials throughout history, the fall of man-made objects and biological aquatic life, and even flesh and blood, from the sky on clear days have been recorded. These remain unexplained. Aside from his electromagnetic pursuits, Hutchison has continued to experiment with a wide range of alternative energy sources. Experimentation with crystals has produced surprising energy results. Using crystals of barium titanate, a material capable of capturing the pulses of certain radio frequencies, Hutchison was able to create his Hutchison converter. A demonstration model of this device ran a small motor without batteries or fuel and without any connection to an electrical outlet. In 1996, Hutchison took a smaller version to Japan, where he demonstrated it before an audience of 500 in Hiroshima, where it is still working non-stop. He believes that this form of energy could be produced by inexpensive refrigerator-sized cylindrical batteries that theoretically could be linked in a series and network in harmony. He further believes this power system could generate up to 110 to 130 volts and apparently work forever. Hutchison has noted that all his energy is free. One must simply tap into it, possibly why several elements look unfavorably on his pursuits. There are other concerns. Tapping into too much zero-point energy can be dangerous. He warns, quote, "If you draw too much from the electromagnetic jitter of zero-point energy, you'll get a minor meltdown. I've had to clean this area up once because of this," end quote. One is tempted to believe that the Hutchison effect is not an effect at all, but the device that creates the observed effects of levitating, burning, disappearance, and so forth. To be more explicit, one is tempted to think of this invisible interaction between these fields as an invisible device itself, a vortex or warp, whatever you may call it, created not by Hutchison's machines and their weak electrical power, but by some field or fields they create in tandem. Hutchison may indeed be the only inventor in history to have invented an invisible device, with astonishing results. Hutchison's creation of this portal into the subatomic structure of the universe is only a discovery. It has yet to be harnessed or directed or even consistently reproduced. In a way, he has, like a fisherman, dipped his net into the vast ocean of universal forces and pulled out what he chanced at first to find. We can now only somewhat wistfully wonder what the harnessing of such a device might bring. At the very least, we should not doubt its inevitability. We have long been used to satellite communications and television, in which voices and pictures travel on frequencies through the atmosphere. In a sense, we have projected sounds and one-dimensional images almost immediately through space to another point thousands of miles away and reassembled them for a television audience. These same frequencies, the billions of fluctuations of 0 point that Hutchison uses or warps, may indeed one day be able to send a three-dimensional object just as speedily to another point in space or time. It might well be wise for us to consider what abusing these invisible wavelengths can do. Machine or machines capable of creating or harnessing this invisible energy are capable of altering the very structure of matter and redirecting the energy inherent in it. The effects seem limitless as the building blocks of matter. It is estimated that the universe consists of 10 to the 80th power atoms. As far as our minds can comprehend today, infinite. Since all structures are composed of atoms, harnessing of such power as exists in the Hutchison effect could be employed for everything, for medical purposes, to eradicate cancer and tumors, to rejuvenate dead tissue into living, for communication, for transportation and exploration, and even for destruction. In many ways, such machines and a civilization capable of harnessing and directing electromagnetism through them are starkly reminiscent of the readings of clairvoyant Edgar Cayce, who lived from 1877 to 1945. Cayce gained worldwide recognition during his lifetime because of the advice he gave while in trances, usually involving cures for various maladies undiagnosed by then conventional medicine. His readings, however, covered a variety of topics because he was called on to answer many people's questions while in his trances. Although he was often called the, quote, sleeping prophet, end quote, many of his readings dealt not with the future, but with the past. Between 1924 and 1944, Cayce made startling statements about areas which today are key parts of the Bermuda Triangle. According to his readings, areas in the Bahamas still hold the remains of vast prehistoric civilization that sank beneath the sea in tragic increments. He associated this civilization with our tales of Atlantis, which, according to Plato, our only Western source, sank some 11,400 years ago in a sudden catastrophic event after the civilization had thrived for thousands of years in peace and glory, but then spiraled into cruelty, abuse, immorality, and war. As far as our knowledge extends today, we are little better off than was Plato in our understanding of this dark epoch in our own history. Everything before 3100 BC is obscured in the vast vault of prehistory, since we have no written records antedating that time. The only records describing that era are vague, the product of possibly hundreds of years of oral tradition, until they were written down in the 3rd to 2nd millennia BC. It is more than interesting that some of our earliest recorded folktales speak of a past and glorious civilization, a time of the, quote, gods, end quote, of floods and catastrophes, and the scattering of mankind. This is not surprising considering that the writing materials, whether clay tablets or papyri, papyri, were not in great abundance and therefore reserved for the most important information. What is interesting about Casey's readings is that he often called this prehistoric civilization Atlantean or Atlantic based, and also credited it with the use of what seems to be the technology mentioned above. He spoke in terms that suggested devices using wavelengths and frequencies, machines that could overcome even gravity, and machines using forces that could send information through the air and direct and power any type of aircraft or vessel. He said furthermore that the Atlanteans built and designed these devices to draw upon, quote, universal forces, end quote. And he outright blamed Atlantis' destruction and its eventual breakup and submersion on the misuse of these power sources. Although these power sources are often called, quote, forces in the light, end quote, or, quote, lights, end quote, he referred frequently to crystals or, quote, stones, end quote, which were part of the apparatus used to harness and direct these energies and give them practical use. Casey, it must be remembered, was not a scientist. He was a lay healer. He often described what he saw as best as he could. Considering that light itself, an electromagnetic wavelength, is merely the expression of energy, his repeated references to light as a power source draw an apt parallel with zero-point energy only now being considered by our own civilization as the ultimate and limitless power source. In developing the prescience of what Casey was trying to convey, one must remember that these readings were given long before any concept of these energies. He repeatedly said the machines used forces, quote, not of the present, end quote, meaning not known or understood circa the 1930s. In referring back to Atlantis, he added, quote, and as we find, it was a period when there was much that has not been thought of yet in the present experience, end quote. These machines came about after the understanding of the, quote, law of universal forces, end quote, from which the machines derived their energies. Also from, quote, elements that are found and not found in the Earth's atmosphere, end quote. A patchwork quotation from a 1933 reading illustrates Casey's attempt to describe the apparatus and its housing. About the Firestone. In the center of a building which would today be said to be lined with non-conductive stone, something akin to asbestos, with other non-conductors, the building above the stone was oval, or dome, wherein there could be a portion for rolling back, so the activity of the stars, the concentration of energies that emanate from bodies that are on fire themselves, the concentration through the prisms of glass, as would be called in the present, was in such a manner that it acted upon the instruments. The preparation of the stone was solely in the hands of the initiates at the time. Among those who directed the influences of the radiation which arose in the form of rays that were invisible to the eye but acted upon the stones themselves as set in the motivating forces. As oddly, so that was the excerpt there. An oddly prescient statement surrounds the electromagnetic vehicles used by this ancient prehistoric civilization. In a reading in January 1943, far antedating any concept of the Bermuda Triangle, UFOs, or USOs, Casey described them as, quote, things of transportation, the aeroplane as called today, but then as ships of the air, for they sailed not only in the air, but in other elements also, end quote. Alright, I need to pause briefly here. I'm going to check out the chat. Oh, Lerny brings up a really good point. He says, imagine a bathtub full of water, except the water is wood. Jason H says, I wouldn't want a splinter. And Lerny says, then don't jump in. And hey, Scott Baker, good to see you here. And Ivy, you're here too. Excellent. This is heavy material we're getting into today. But I'm actually reading very fast here. I'd like to try to finish the chapter. We only got 10 pages left. We'll see if we can do it in 30 minutes. And again, thank you all to who's here watching. I can't see how many people are watching right now, but we are live on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute, and Odyssey. So I thank all of you that are here watching live. And don't forget to leave a like. It'll help with the reach of the video to others. Alright, so let's continue here. Even more surprising, Casey directly linked a harnessing of electromagnetism to effects only recently discovered. Quote, an Atlantean land at time of development of electrical forces that dealt with transportation of craft from place to place, photographing at a distance, reading inscriptions through walls even at a distance, overcoming gravity itself, preparation of the crystal, the terrible mighty crystal. Much of this brought destruction. End quote. This destruction, as suggested by a careful reading of Casey's statements, continued over a long period of time because the Atlanteans were completely unable to grasp what was causing the upheavals. As in the case of the phenomena associated with Hutchinson's electromagnetic tests, the side effects built up unpredictably. The catalyst of a period of upheaval and submergence shows a striking resemblance to John Hutchison's warnings about the misuses of zero-point energy. Quote, they brought destructive forces by setting up in various portions of the land the kind that was to act in producing powers for the various forms of the people's activities in the cities, the towns, and the countries surrounding same. These, not intentionally, were tuned too high and brought the second period of destructive forces to the people in the land. End quote. It was the last portion of Atlantis to sink that Casey directly associated with the Bahamas, or, actually, the Great Bahama Bank, upon which the Bahamian Islands today are but mere tips of its former low-lying hills. Casey called it Poseidia, and said it was only a fraction of the land mass of the original Atlantean continent. Casey often comes back to trying to describe these machines more than the forces they manipulated. Understandably, because he could see, quote unquote, the machines and not the forces. Enduring substances such as crystals and glass and the firestone cut with crystalline facets were repeated themes. Several of his followers maintain that these ruined machines or parts of them could still be below the ocean in the Bahamas. According to their view, thermal energies in the Earth and their wavelengths or frequencies might still exert an influence on these crystal devices, which in turn capture and convert them, and then, using this pulse of energy, randomly affect a vessel or plane in the nearby vicinity. They contend that this explains the electromagnetic anomalies, and in some cases, even contributes to the disintegration of a ship or plane. Sorry, that was my alarm from last week. Should have made sure to turn that off. So do you understand what he's saying here? And I think we brought this up before. That whatever technology Atlantis had, that it's misfiring from time to time, and that's why we're having all these disappearances. Sorry, Lerny. He says it's the same alarm as I'm having. You had me looking around my desk. Yeah, it's the only one that works for me at this point. Like, I'm able to wake up from a deep sleep using that one. But I did go ahead earlier tonight than normal, because we've been doing 8 o'clock shows, 8 p.m. Central. Today we started at 6 p.m. Central. I'm trying to get back to the 6 p.m. Central time slot. It's going to benefit me going forward doing this a little earlier. But let's continue here. From our perspective today, the idea of machines without the limiting need for continuing electrical power, which is dependent on some sort of fuel or generator, is absurd. The machinery would also be subject to the need for maintenance, to deterioration over time, and to the physical and eroding effects of entropy. But however absurd it seems, our own civilization is being made acutely aware of small versions of these machines, such as the Hutchison converter, which even Hutchison believes could run forever, and to which crystalline power sources are vital. Other devices have existed that are remarkably similar to those in Casey's readings of Atlantis. Knowledge of these has recently been unearthed by Nick Cook in The Hunt for Zero Point, an unexpected coincidence between the universal forces Casey mentioned and zero-point energy. A coincidence made more intriguing by the fact that neither inventors nor Cook were even aware of Cassian Atlantis. So that'll be another book to look up. Nick Cook is the author, and the title is The Hunt for 0 Point. All right. And we also have a diagram that was on the previous page. I just had to finish the sentence on it. So this says the Great Bahama Bank is the only underwater bank in the world that would form a huge island if the level of the oceans were only 50 feet below their present levels. So basically what you're going to be seeing here, the lighter portion, if the water were a little shallower, the brighter portion would pop up. Really, it seems like Florida and that whole area between down to Cuba, all of that used to be connected at one point. I mean, the Florida Keys are very obviously... I mean, this whole area, the peninsula going into the Gulf, that would all be above water. And Florida State would be more like a mountain then. Alright, and then on to coincidences. Continuing on. One seems to be revealed from secret tests conducted by the Germans in the closing days of World War II, by which they were attempting to create energy by a torsion field effect. The tests were codenamed Lanternentrager, or Lantern Holder, and Chronos, or Time. And my German's very poor, so if I mispronounce those, that's why. They suspended a bell-shaped metal object down a mine shaft into a specially prepared chamber lined with non-conductive tiles or rubber, and spun it at speeds sufficient to bend space around the orb or channel elements in the atmosphere into vortex kinesis, reminiscent of the way, in some ways, of Casey's great power sources contained in chambers with non-conductive material and long columns for centralizing energy. Cook notes that the change in code names for the same project may indicate that they discovered that time was also being affected and then pursued that angle, only then to be stopped by the end of the war and subsequent capture. Cook also notes that when questioned by the Polish courts in secret and the Russian NKVD after his capture, one general, Jacob Sporenberg, overseer of security for the tests, used such words as, quote, vortex compression, end quote, and, quote, magnetic fields separation, end quote, conveying pieces of phraseology he had picked up from the scientists he had been guarding. These tests may originally have been trying to duplicate, only on a grander scale, a device developed by German scientist Victor Schauberger. And that's spelled Schauberger. In 1939, this device first worked successfully. An understanding of its mechanism will lend startling body to the expression, quote, vortex compression, end quote. The device, called the repulsine, operated literally on air by swirling into a dense emulsion charged particles such as protons and electrons in the atmosphere. The repulsine, shaped like a large bonbon with a cone-shaped turbine and air intake on top, had a small motor that drew in air via the intake. This air was channeled through a whorl-shaped interior. And in parentheses it says the spiraling shape of a corkscrew or certain seashells. Between the turbine and its bonbon baseplate, the vortex movement of the air within the machine rapidly cooled and condensed it, reducing its volume and creating a massive vacuum and suction, which continued to suck in more air on its own. The motor then could be turned off, and the device operated purely on what is the first reference to, quote, free energy, end quote. The vortex collision and annihilation of charged particles. This provides yet another corollary to Casey's machines that operated on elements, quote, in the atmosphere, end quote. Schauberger was visionary enough to see that a machine capable of channeling the subatomic world of charged particles, in essence, of matter in its dematerialized state, was capable of producing limitless power. He believed that machines capable of vortex compression could power almost anything, provided that a short burst of energy began the self-augmenting vacuum. Believing the power of these machines could be engineered to reduce energy to its matter form, he considered the potential of a man-made vortex. Quote, I stand face to face with the apparent void, the compression of dematerialization that we are wont to call a vacuum. I can now see that we are able to create anything we wish for ourselves out of this nothing. End quote. Before Casey, interest in the ancient legend of Atlantis was restricted to Plato's dialogues. Timaeus and Critias from the 4th century BC, which first told the story of a prehistoric civilization, quote, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, end quote, or the Straits of Gibraltar. Plato, however, did not claim it as a Greek original, but rather openly explained how it came from an even earlier period of knowledge of which the Egyptians were still the custodians. Quote, in the Egyptian delta, at the head of which the Nile River divides, there is a certain district which is called the district of Sais. We've got a friend with the last name there, don't we? Let's see if I can show you. Isn't that Abe's last name? The plot thickens. And the great city of the district is also called Sais. To this city came Solon, spelled Solon, the Athenian lawgiver, and was received there with great honor. He asked the priests, who were most skillful in such matters, about antiquity. End quote. And then here we have an excerpt. It says, many great and wonderful deeds are recorded of your state, Athens, in our histories. But one of them exceeds all the others in greatness and valor. For these histories tell of a mighty power which, unprovoked, made an expedition against the whole of Asia and Europe, and to which your city put an end. This power came from the Atlantic Ocean, for in those days the Atlantic was navigable, and there was an island situated in front of the straits you call the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar. The island was larger than Libya and Asia put together, and was the way to other islands, and from those you might pass to the whole of the opposite continent which surrounded the true ocean. For this sea, which is within the Straits of Hercules, is only a harbor, having a narrow entrance, but the other is a real sea, and the surrounding land may be most truly called a boundless continent. That's the end of the excerpt. Okay, thanks for clarifying, Lerny. Yeah, it's such a close name. So the A and the I are switched around. Plato can be pardoned for skewing the tale of Atlantis into glorifying the Athenian state, which did not even exist 11,400 years ago. But if his tale is entirely fable, it is hard to explain his knowledge of the Atlantic, of its size disparity as compared to the Mediterranean, of the islands beyond, presumably the Caribbean, and then of America, quote, the boundless continent beyond them. This is something even Columbus did not suspect. He thought he would reach India and China on his voyage. The reason why Native American peoples were first called Indians, and why the islands of the Caribbean and the Bahamas are called the West Indies. There is no reason to suppose that anything more than just the barest snippets of information trickled down to Plato's time, leaving him to fill in the rest. It can be said that the Great Bahama Bank was once, quote, an island beyond the Pillars of Hercules. And in many ways, the present Bahamas also fit his broad description of the aftermath of the Atlantean subsidence. Quote, the consequence is that, in comparison of what then was, there are remaining in small islets only the bones of that wasted body, as they may be called, all the richer and softer parts of the soil having fallen away, and the mere skeleton of the country being left. End quote. Anyway, Pluto's tale seems a great composite, a mixture of flood stories popular throughout the ancient world, and the attack on the entire eastern Mediterranean by the, quote, sea peoples, end quote, of whom the Philistines were a branch, and which Egypt, not Greece, was able to rebuff. Plato referred to a stunning alloy called orichalcum, in Latin aurichalcum. And I'll spell the original word, orichalcum, that made up the fabulous wall of the citadel of Atlantis. It is hardly unknown. It is a mixture of gold, brass, and copper. Josephus even said that the altar wash basin outside the temple at Jerusalem was made of orichalcum. If the tale is an admixture with Plato's skewing of it to fit Athens into the picture added, then the tale as we know it today, or even for the last 2,400 years, is so convoluted that if such prehistoric civilization existed, our exact knowledge of it is denuded of facts beyond the repeating ones of submergence and great destruction, and that the Atlantic was the epicenter of this. Because of Plato's obvious borrowings, the actual location of ancient Atlantis and its time period have been questioned for centuries. Generations of scholars have suggested it was the Azores, or an island in the Aegean, or Israel, Sicily, India, or inevitably, after Columbus's time, America. Edgar Cayce was the first one to ever associate any part of the Bahamas with the fabled continent. Needless to say, this bold assertion only underscores the already obvious differences between Cayce's Atlantis and Plato's and these other conjectures. But it is nevertheless in this assertion that it becomes the only one that has ever been corroborated by evidence which exists in a most remarkable prophecy and an even more remarkable discovery. For his one and only time, and what as a result becomes his most surprising reading, Cayce actually mentioned a specific island in the Bahamas and then directly associated it with the novel electromagnetic power sources of that prehistoric age. And here's the excerpt here. As for a description of the manner of construction of the stone, we find it was a large cylindrical glass, as would be termed today, cut with facets in such a manner that the capstone on top of it made for centralizing the power or force that concentrated between the end of the cylinder and the capstone itself. As indicated, the records as to ways of constructing same are in 3 places in the earth as it stands today. In the sunken portion of Atlantis, or Poseidia, where a portion of the temple may yet be discovered under the slime of ages of seawater near what is known as Bimini, off the coast of Florida. And that's the end of the excerpt. Earlier, he foretold this temple's destruction and reemergence. Quote, as given, the temple was destroyed at the time there was the last destruction in Atlantis. Yet, as the time draws nigh, when the changes are to come about, there may be the opening of those 3 places where the records are won. The temple by Iltar will then rise again. End quote. In another reading given in 1940, Casey added an unexpected terse codicil to his Poseidia predictions. Quote, Poseidia will be amongst the first portions of Atlantis to rise again. Expect it in 68 and 69, not so far away. End quote. Whether Casey meant this record exists in some written form or in an excavation of an actual machine is not specified. Yet to mention the obscure island of Bimini in 1933 draws us strangely to the only location out of all those offered above where the ruins have been found underwater that cannot be associated with or credited to any known civilization on Earth. These surprising discoveries were indeed made in 1968, more than 20 years after Casey died, at the unlikely location where he said remains would be found, the Great Bahama Bank, and in some equally remarkable circumstances. The unusual chain of events began routine overflights. The tides seemed to have been sweeping in different fashion than usual and had uncovered several odd shapes below. Dmitry Rebikoff, spelled Rebikoff, an underwater photographic inventor and amateur archaeologist, first sighted a rectangle measuring about a quarter-mile long that seemed too perfectly formed to be natural. In July, pilots Bob Brush and Trig Adams photographed a partitioned rectangle near Andros Island that was suggestive of the floor plan of a ruined building. But the most extraordinary finds were on Labor Day at Bimini. Dr. J. Manson Valentine, professor of oceanography at the University of Miami, diving into the shallow waters off Paradise Point on the island's northwest shore, discovered several huge polygonal stones. By their opposing edges, it seemed they had once been cut to fit each other with precision, much like the mysterious pre-Inca stone walls in Peru. Although they had pillowed by this time, that is, their edges had been worn and eroded by the action of the surf or currents, it could still be clearly seen how their angles had at one time fit into the opposing stones. With three other divers, Jacques Mayol, Mayol, Chip Climo, Climo, and Bob Angove, Angove, Valentine glided over a larger edifice to estimate its size. It extended for about 1,900 feet and was shaped like an inverted J. This structure, later named the Bimini Wall or Road because it resembles either a fallen wall or a broad paved stone road, was constructed, as its discoverer observed, quote, of stones which were absolutely rectangular, sometimes approaching perfect squares. The larger pieces, at least 10 to 15 feet in length, often ran the width of parallel-sided avenues, while the small ones formed mosaic-like pavements covering broader sections, end quote. In commenting on his first reaction to this unexpected sight, Valentine said, quote, When I saw the regular pattern of these enormous stones, I was so surprised I lost my weight belt. I could hardly believe it. It was like a dream. I followed it for hundreds of yards to the big stones that go under the sand, end quote. Expanding his searches from the air, Valentine, accompanied by Dmitry Rybakov, discovered an array of geometric forms on the shallow Great Bahama Bank, either by outlines from bottom growth tracing their pattern, or by the lack thereof. In all, he has counted 30 sites where, in his own words, quote, there are probably man-made remains either on the sea bottom or below it. For example, between Diamond Point and Tongue of the Ocean, there is a network of modular straight lines intersecting at right, obtuse, and acute angles. It resembles an architect's plan for a complex urban development with still more lines in the distance, which I call ghost patterns, since they are vague outlines of other structures too deeply buried to be traced in detail. All this suggests to me the one-time presence of ancient peoples. End quote. Valentine and his discoveries have been subjected to varying degrees of criticism to this day, with some underwater archaeologists flatly denying that the Bimini Road, the only one they have heard of, is man-made, or after a brief visit, making the unsubstantiated claim that they are granite or beach rock. Others have first agreed that they were man-made, but then have recanted, possibly because of peer pressure from many archaeologists, most of whom have never visited any of the sites but are hostile to the theory of an unknown civilization. And we have two overheads here that we're going to take a look at. This first one says, Bimini in the Bahamas. It is a small island about 50 miles from the Florida coast with only a couple of settlements, Alice and Baileytown. The deepest water in the immediate vicinity is only 18 feet. Off Paradise Point on the northwest shore lie the Bimini Road and Bimini Walls. The inverted J is the road. The parallel sections of the polygonal stones are the wall. Most of the eastern part of the island is marsh. There we go. So you get an idea of what they're talking about here. And then the second portion here says, the Bimini Road. It is made up of huge stones and forks past the main lead. The shape suggests a giant bar magnet in its complete form. The most mysterious cultures of ancient Peru also built temples in a giant U shape, the remaining half of which the road seems to suggest. And then also parallel sections of the Bimini Wall. They run at an angle to the road and look very much like huge fallen Peruvian walls. So we're talking about the parallel walls here. And then that's the way the stones are set up. Alright, we're finishing up here. Valentine has subjected the area a much more prolonged and subjective investigation. In commenting on the composition and alignment of the Bimini stones, he has observed, quote, these are not squares of beach rock arranged by nature in neat rows to fool gullible underwater archaeologists. Many of the stones are of flint-hard micrite, unlike soft beach rock. The lines are closely fitted, straight, mutually parallel, and terminate in cornerstones. The stone avenue does not follow the curving beach rock line, which follows the shape of the island, but is straight. End quote. He adds, quote, perfect rectangles, right angles, and rectilinear configurations are unaccountable in a natural formation, end quote. Perhaps no other person has examined the site as carefully as Valentine than author David Zink, it's spelled Zink, on 2 expeditions in 1975 and 1976. In successive dives, he mapped and photographed many of the stones of the Bimini Road. So David Zink. And he has a book here. In his book, The Stones of Atlantis, Zink notes the discovery of several critically placed stones shaped like a wedge, an arrow, or a chalk stone that match sacred geometry used by Earth's earliest and still mysterious megalithic cultures. Although these discoveries have excited the followers of Edgar Cayce, they have not proven any claims of a past super civilization contained in his readings. The discoveries have been controversial enough, even with just the bare inference that they represent an unknown culture highly skilled in building, much less one with the capabilities Cayce's adherents believe once existed in the Bahamas. It is equally true that their belief that the Bermuda Triangle's anomalies can be explained by this vanished civilization's power complexes hinges only on these readings and on what are only vague outlines underwater, no matter how striking or intriguing they may be. Nevertheless, considerable enigma has been added to Cayce's readings by evidence supporting the idea that the Bimini stones are in fact man-made by some unidentified prehistoric culture. A case in point is the fact that a representation of them has recently been found in the Piri Reis map, the earliest surviving map of the Americas, dated to 1513 and rediscovered only in 1929, when the dethroned Sultan's Topkapi Palace in Istanbul was being cleaned out. On the map, the stones are shown as a row of polygonal prostrate stones marking the center of an island in the Bahamas group, a gesture on the part of old cartographers to indicate a unique or salient feature of a specific location. Also a clear indication the Spanish were amazed by them. The native Taino tribe of the Bahamas also seems to have been aware of their presence on land, referring to Bimini as the, quote, island of the fallen wall, end quote. Every time an uncanny parallel develops in our technological progress with that of Cayce's past Atlantis, interest in his readings reaches a new peak. Today, companies such as TerraBeam and Airfiber are developing the means to direct internet and visual information via beams of invisible light from base stations to various relay towers that would in turn direct them to a dish at one's house or office, a completely cordless transmission of ideas, sound, pictures, and energy, surprisingly similar to Cayce's Atlantis and its hubs of buildings and temples with relay crystals atop them, although neither company was aware of or is remotely interested in Cayce's readings of the past. It is natural, of course, to seek an explanation for the ruins in the Bermuda Triangle, as well as for the persisting yet unpredictable electromagnetic anomalies in the area. This is especially important since these anomalies may represent an actual or perceived danger to any traveler in the area and contribute directly or indirectly to a disappearance. But if one cannot believe the stones are generating them, then where else can one look for their origin? Somewhere in the past of this planet is a good guess. With its many geological scars testifying to horrendous upheavals, we may find an answer that can explain how a prehistoric civilization could be cataclysmically destroyed, how parts of it could sink, and how latent tensions and forces could develop as a result. These electromagnetic anomalies may be not the cause of a continent's submergence, but stresses left over from a catastrophe that may very well connect them to Atlantis in a most unexpected way. For this answer to the triangle, we must go deeper down, not into any fathoms of water, but into the murky mists of the past. Wow. So we have a whole bunch of photographs here. And this is going to take like another 20-30 minutes just to show all of these. So I'm going to hold off on showing these pictures until next week. That'll be prior to us reading Chapter 7, which is titled Clues from a Shifting Paradigm. But these are photographs of the Bimini stones. I'll just give like a quick look, and then we'll look at stuff later next week. Because really, I have to cut this show short today. I'm sorry. I actually didn't expect us to get through everything today like we did. Like, we finished the chapter. I'm shocked that we finished it. I want to at least show Hutchison's picture here. So yeah, we'll go over all of these next week. There's like 4 or 5 pages. And it'll be a good refresher. I'll read all the captions on it. I'll show this all individually. I got stone walls as well to look at. So that'll be for next week. And then we'll have Chapter 7. Clues from a Shifting Paradigm. Which we should be able to complete that next week too. But that'll do it for today. I appreciate you all being here. Again, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. I'll be here every Thursday evening doing this. It's been very consistent, and I intend to carry this along. So I appreciate y'all being here. And I hope to see you again soon. And hopefully I'll catch you on Sunday when I will be doing our Let's Talk About It series. So until then, you got a lot to think about what we just went over. Look up John Hutchison if you haven't yet. It's definitely worth checking out. And we'll start off next week with the Bimini Road and Bimini Walls and other photographs pertaining to the chapter we just read today. So, until the next one, class dismissed.